When you think of survival in the bitter cold of a medieval winter, you might picture roaring fires, heavy furs, or salted meat. But in China, there was something else. Something far smaller, more fragile, and more powerful than all of these. A single leaf plucked from a shrub, dried, and brewed into a steaming cup. Tea from medieval Chinese families. This simple drink was more than comfort. It was medicine, warmth, energy, and even a tool of empire. Tonight, we'll journey through the forgotten history of how tea became the quiet lifeline of winter survival, shaping daily life, trade, and politics in ways you might never expect. So settle in, because once you learn why medieval families couldn't survive without tea, you'll never look at your own cup quite the same way again. Chapter 1. The harsh reality of winter in medieval China. When you picture China in the Middle Ages, it might be tempting to imagine bustling markets along the Silk Road, emperors presiding over their courts, or monks debating philosophy in candlelit halls. Yet, for most families, daily life was defined less by philosophy and more by the season, especially the punishing reality of winter. Winter in northern and central China was often long, dry, and bitterly cold. Temperatures in certain regions could plummet well below freezing, and food storage was an art that determined whether families would see the first thaw of spring. Without modern insulation, homes were drafty, their wooden beams groaning against the wind. Heating came only from clay stoves fueled with precious wood or charcoal, and warmth was rationed carefully. For peasants and townsfolk alike, every choice in winter carried the weight of survival. This is where tea enters the story. At first glance, tea may seem like a luxury, a beverage for rest and leisure. But in medieval China, especially from the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907, through the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279, tea was woven directly into the struggle for endurance during the cold season. For a family confined to a modest house with paper-thin walls, sipping warm tea was not only comfort, but a lifeline, helping to fend off illness, maintain energy, and stretch limited resources. Food scarcity and winter hardships. Imagine an ordinary farming family in Hunan province. Their summer and autumn had been consumed by planting millet, rice, or wheat, tending to pigs or chickens, and storing whatever surplus they could produce. Once the harvest ended, the granaries might be stocked with millet or wheat flour, dried vegetables like turnips, radishes, or cabbage, and preserved foods salted or fermented in clay jars. Yet no matter how carefully they prepared, by the depth of January, supplies ran low. Fresh greens were rare, and vitamin deficiencies could easily weaken the body. Illness spread quickly in cold, cramped homes. Unlike the elite of the capital, ordinary villagers did not dine on elaborate banquets, but survived on porridge, flatbreads, or broths made from scraps. Here, tea made a crucial difference. The leaves steeped in boiling water transformed plain hot liquid into something that could warm the chest, aid digestion, and provide a trace of nutrients. In times when food was scarce, a hot cup of tea could suppress hunger, giving the illusion of fullness until the next meager meal. The practicality of hot water, beyond flavor and nourishment, tea also carried a hidden advantage: sanitation. Water drawn from rivers or wells could harbor disease, especially in colder months when families reused stagnant sources. By custom and necessity, tea was boiled before drinking, and this act of boiling killed harmful bacteria long before germ theory existed. A family that consumed tea, even if poor, had a greater chance of avoiding waterborne illnesses in winter. This wasn't merely habit, it was survival science, disguised as tradition. Tea in the Tang Dynasty, from medicine to daily life. The roots of tea in winter survival stretch back to its earliest role in Chinese society, as medicine. Records from the Tang Dynasty describe tea as a tonic prescribed by physicians for ailments, ranging from digestive troubles to fatigue. By steeping the leaves, people extracted compounds like caffeine and theanine. which provided alertness and a subtle calm. A rare combination especially useful in days filled with both labor and stress. Monks in Buddhist monasteries championed tea for another reason. It sustained them during long hours of meditation in cold halls. A monk sipping bitter green tea in the pre-dawn hours wasn't seeking pleasure, but endurance. Over time, this association of tea with resilience trickled down into common practice. Families saw tea not as indulgence, but as necessary, something even more vital when the cold pressed in. Cultural adaptations for the cold. Different regions of China adapted tea to fit their climate. In the north, bricks of compressed tea were boiled with salt, ginger, or even onion, creating a thick, sustaining brew. This salty tea was warming and hearty, closer to soup than a delicate beverage. In the south, where winters were milder but damp, lighter infusions were common, balancing moisture in the body and warding off chills. For both regions, the cup of tea was not only about taste, but also about how the body responded to the elements. To drink tea was to adapt, to align the fragile human frame with the overwhelming force of nature. A winter gathering around tea. Picture a small family huddled in their cottage during the coldest night of the year. The father feeds a handful of twigs into the clay stove, and the mother crouches to stir a pot balanced above the flames. As steam begins to rise, she tosses in tea leaves bought weeks earlier in the village market. The leaves unfurl, coloring the water a deep amber. Children lean closer, their breath fogging in the cold. Each family member receives a small clay cup. They sip carefully, not just for warmth, but for reassurance. Outside, the wind lashes against the thatched roof. But inside, the warmth of tea forms an invisible shield. This is the reality often overlooked in grand histories of dynasties and empires. The small, repetitive acts that allowed ordinary people to endure. Tea was not an emperor's luxury, but a villager's quiet companion through the bleakest nights. As you can see, tea in medieval China was more than a beverage. It was a response to scarcity, an answer to illness, and a silent partner in the endurance of countless winters. Yet, this was only the beginning. Tea was not only drunk for survival. It soon became part of ritual, medicine, and the very rhythm of daily life. Which raises the question, how did tea evolve from a simple winter necessity into a symbol of health, community, and culture in medieval China? Chapter 2. Tea as medicine, ritual, and social glue. By the time tea had established itself as a household necessity in winter survival, it had already acquired a deeper meaning beyond simple nourishment. In medieval China, particularly from the Tang through the Song dynasties, tea began to shift into a role that was not only practical but cultural, spiritual, and social. It is easy, from a modern perspective, to see tea as something refined. Delicate porcelain cups, calligraphy-adorned tea houses, and poetic gatherings where scholars debated over steaming bowls. Yet, beneath those elegant images was a more profound truth. Tea was a tool of endurance. It kept families healthier, kept monks focused, and bound communities together in small but powerful ways. Tea as medicine in the cold season. Winter was always a season of illness. Cold winds carried coughs from one household to another, and poor nutrition left many vulnerable. Before the development of advanced medicine, Chinese families relied heavily on herbal remedies passed down through generations. Tea was one of these remedies. Pharmacological texts, such as those by Tang-era physician Chun Zhang, described tea as clearing heat, aiding digestion, and strengthening the body. For families suffering from stomach troubles brought on by preserved or fermented winter foods, tea acted as a balancing tonic. Ginger was often added to tea during winter, not just for flavor, but for its warming quality in traditional Chinese medicine. Believed to push out the cold lodged deep within the body. Tea was also prescribed to help with lethargy, the kind of fatigue brought on by long dark winters. A farmer too weak to work, a scholar struggling to copy manuscripts by candlelight, or a child recovering from illness could all benefit from the stimulating properties of tea. It was a medicine that did not feel like medicine, disguised as a daily ritual. The rise of tea rituals. From utility to ceremony by the Tang dynasty, tea drinking had begun to shift from simple boiling to something more refined. Poet and tea enthusiast Lu Yu, often called the Sage of Tea, wrote the classic of Tea Xia, Jing, in the 8th century. In this text, he described not only how tea should be prepared, but also how it should be appreciated. His work transformed tea from a mere household necessity into an object of aesthetic and cultural value. But this refinement was not just for the elites. Even common families adopted small rituals around tea, especially in winter when life slowed down. A simple act like warming the clay teapot before pouring boiling water was both practical and symbolic, an act of care in a season that tested endurance. Drinking tea together became an unspoken ritual of survival. A family would gather in the evenings not just to keep warm, but to affirm that they had made it through another day. In towns and villages, neighbors would share bowls of tea, spreading warmth and companionship that no stove alone could provide. Tea in Buddhist monasteries, a spiritual discipline. While families and villagers drank tea for health and warmth, Buddhist monasteries made tea an essential part of spiritual practice. In winter, monks faced bitter cold in drafty halls where meditation stretched for hours. Many monasteries were located in mountainous regions where snow and frost lasted long into the year. Tea provided not only warmth but wakefulness, keeping monks alert during long recitations of sutras or meditation sessions that stretched into the night. This connection between tea and clarity of mind spread beyond monasteries. Scholars and poets, inspired by Buddhist practice, embraced tea as a drink that fostered focus, calm, and balance. For them, tea was not indulgence but a discipline, a small but steadying act of care for body and spirit. The monk's bowl of tea in a cold mountain temple was not so different from the farmer's clay cup in a frozen cottage. Both were gestures of survival, one physical and the other spiritual. Tea as social glue, family and community bonds as tea moved deeper into everyday life. It became a bridge between people. During the Song dynasty, public tea houses became increasingly common. In cities such as Kaifeng and Hangzhou, tea houses were gathering places not only for merchants and scholars, but also for laborers, travelers, and storytellers. For the cost of a few coins, one could sit in a warm space, sip tea, and listen to news or entertainment. In winter, when outdoor life was harsh, these tea houses became essential hubs of community survival. In smaller villages, tea served the same purpose around the family hearth. Guests were welcomed with tea, neighbors shared it after a day of collective labor, and disputes were sometimes softened with steaming bowls offered as gestures of goodwill. In the cold months, such customs were more than politeness. They were lifelines of trust and solidarity in communities, where cooperation could mean survival. Tea and class differences. It is worth noting, however, that tea also reflected social hierarchies. For the wealthy, winter tea might be served in fine porcelain cups, flavored with rare spices, or enjoyed during literary gatherings where poems were composed about the rising steam. Tea was integrated into a lifestyle of elegance and luxury. For the poor, tea was simpler, perhaps a small portion of coarse leaves purchased at the market, steeped multiple times to stretch its use. Yet in both cases, the essence was the same, the warm infusion that carried people through long winters. This duality, tea as both luxury and necessity, is what made it such a powerful thread in Chinese life. Everyone, regardless of status, relied on it in some form, a winter scene of shared tea. Imagine now a winter evening in the Song capital of Kaifeng. Outside, the streets are quiet, dusted with snow, and the cold air bites through even the thickest layers of clothing. But step inside a tea house near the market, and the scene is transformed inside. Benches and low tables are crowded with townsfolk. The air is filled with steam, the chatter of neighbors, and the aroma of boiled tea. A storyteller recites a tale from memory, his voice rising above the clatter of cups. Merchants exchange news of the latest trade caravans, while scholars, wrapped in heavy robes, scribble notes by lamplight. In this place, tea is not only survival, it is connection. It is conversation, warmth, and the assurance that no one must endure the cold alone. Tea, then, was more than a drink. It was medicine for the body, a ritual for the spirit, and a bond for the community. By the high medieval period of Chinese history, it had become an indispensable part of cultural life, reaching into monasteries, markets, and homes alike. But this raises a deeper question. If tea was so central to survival and community, how did it shape China's economy, politics, and even its place in global history? Chapter 3: Tea, Trade, and the Foundations of a Global Commodity. By the time medieval Chinese families, monks, and merchants had fully embraced tea as their winter lifeline, the story of tea was no longer confined to homes and monasteries. It began to shape economies, influence government policy, and eventually reach beyond China's borders. What had once been a simple leaf plucked from a mountain shrub transformed into one of the most influential commodities of world history. If we are to understand why medieval Chinese families could not survive winter without tea, we must also look at how tea was intertwined with power, wealth, and survival on a broader scale. The state's interest in tea. Governments have always been quick to notice what people cannot live without. In medieval China, as tea consumption expanded from elites to ordinary households, the state recognized both its value and its inevitability. By the Tang dynasty, tea was already taxed in certain regions, but it was under the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279, that the state developed a more systematic monopoly. The government strictly controlled tea production, collecting it as tribute, taxing it as a commercial good, and regulating its trade in winter. When families consumed more tea for warmth and health, demand only increased. The state saw tea as a steady revenue stream, one that could help fund armies, build canals, and maintain the bureaucracy that governed the empire. For the average family, this meant that tea was not just a necessity. It was also a reminder of state authority. Each bowl of tea in winter connected the household not only to survival, but also to the vast machinery of imperial governance. Tea and the tribute system. Tea also entered the political realm through China's tribute system. Nomadic groups along China's northern frontier, such as the Khitans, Jurchens, and later the Mongols, valued Chinese tea immensely. For peoples living in colder climates, where dairy and meat were staples, tea was seen as a cleansing, balancing drink. It aided digestion and was believed to counteract the heaviness of animal-based diets. The Chinese court used tea as a diplomatic tool, sending massive quantities northward in exchange for horses, military alliances, or peace treaties. This tea for horses trade became particularly vital during the Song dynasty, when cavalry was essential to defend the empire's borders. Here, tea's role in survival widened. It was not only the lifeline of families in frosty cottages, but also the lifeline of empires struggling to defend their frontiers. The spread of tea culture within China. As demand spread, so too did innovations in tea preparation. By the Tang dynasty, tea was often pressed into cakes or bricks, which could be easily stored, transported, and even used as currency in trade. In the Song dynasty, the practice of whisking powdered tea into a frothy liquid became popular among elites, a style that would later influence the Japanese tea ceremony. In rural households, tea preparation remained simpler. Leaves were boiled or steeped, sometimes with salt, ginger, or onion to fortify the body in winter. Each method reflected not only cultural preference, but also survival strategies adapted to local environments. From palace halls to village huts, tea's preparation varied, but its meaning remained constant: a defense against the cold, a small daily act of resilience. Tea and the Silk Road, beyond China's borders. Tea began to flow along trade routes, though in more limited forms during the medieval period. By the Tang dynasty, tea was already reaching Central Asia, carried by merchants along the Silk Road. For caravans braving desert winds and mountain snows, tea was a practical good as well as a profitable one. A compressed tea brick could be shaved into boiling water, providing both warmth and stimulation for long journeys. Like salt or grain, tea became a portable necessity, compact enough to travel great distances. By the Yuan dynasty under Mongol rule, tea had become even more entrenched in cross-cultural exchange. The Mongols, accustomed to dairy-rich diets, adopted tea as a balancing drink. Its medicinal and digestive benefits were recognized across steppe communities, making it part of the broader survival strategies of nomadic peoples. In this way, tea's role in winter spread beyond China, slowly planting the seeds of the global commodity it would later become: tea, power, and everyday survival. One cannot overlook the subtle but profound fact that tea's history is not simply one of luxury or refinement. It is one of survival woven into the smallest details of daily life. For the scholar hunched over his manuscripts in the icy glow of an oil lamp, tea provided focus. For the farmer's wife tending a smoky hearth, it was medicine and comfort. For soldiers stationed on the frigid northern frontiers, it was a ration that gave strength. And for emperors negotiating with neighboring powers, it was a tool of statecraft. The threads of survival were everywhere, and tea was the quiet link binding them together. A winter reflection. Imagine once more a medieval Chinese household in the depth of winter. The fire burns low, and the wind rattles the shutters. Outside, fields lie barren, and the world is quiet under frost. Yet inside, a clay teapot sits steaming. A family gathers, cupping their hands around bowls of hot tea, sipping slowly. Their breath mingles with the steam, and for a moment, the chill of the season loosens its grip. That bowl is more than a drink. It is medicine, ritual, nourishment, and connection. It is the small miracle that carried countless families through the long winters of medieval China. Closing thought. So when we ask why medieval Chinese families could not survive winter without tea, the answer lies not in one reason, but in many. Tea was warmth for the body, medicine for the sick, discipline for the spirit, connection for the community, and currency for the empire. It was quite simply the quiet lifeline of survival. But here is a thought to leave you with. If something as ordinary as a leaf could shape survival, culture, and politics in medieval China, how many other ordinary things in history have carried weight far greater than we realize? And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Just as tea carried medieval families through the long winters, I hope this quiet journey has carried you gently toward rest. Thank you for spending this time with me here at Quiet Boring Sleep. If you enjoyed drifting through history tonight, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps our little corner of calm history grow. Until next time, may your night be peaceful and may sleep find you easily.